Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. Welcome to Mass Literacy, Early Literacy for Bilingual Students with Dr. Mariela Pez. Thank you all for joining us today. If you have any questions during this webinar, please use the Q&A function that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions and answers. We obviously will not be able to answer all the questions that you might have. There will be a brief survey at the end, and you will be able to ask questions there also. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be posted on the Mass Literacy Guide website. Also, closed captioning option is available down at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that and get closed captioning. This is webinar number 3 in our series of webinars that feature prominent researchers in the field of literacy. We have one left with Dr. Sonia Cabell on February 3rd. My name is Susan Kazeroid. I'm one of the literacy content leads at the department, and I will be playing the role of MC today. In a few minutes, I'm going to be turning it over to our feature presentation, Dr. Mariela Pez, who I am so excited for you all to hear from. Then Donna Goldstein will be making some quick connections to the Mass Literacy Guide website. And we will end our day with the Director of Office and Literacy, Catherine Tarka, presenting questions to Dr. Páez. Mass literacy is a statewide effort to empower educators with the evidence-based practices for literacy that all students need. Evidence-based instruction provided within schools and classrooms that are culturally responsive and sustaining will put our youngest students on a path toward literacy for life. As part of mass literacy, over the next several years, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education will offer early literacy programming paired with implementation supports, including resources, professional developments, and grants. This is a screenshot of the Mass Literacy landing page. Here you see a video featuring classroom teachers, specialists, and a couple of the researchers who advised us on the guide. Many voices, perspectives, and areas of expertise contributed to this work. The featured speakers in the video were among the 100+ stakeholders who advised us on this work. We engaged with research advisors from across the country and even internationally. Massachusetts preschool and elementary teachers, administrators, and educator preparation faculty. DESE also partnered with the Mass Association of School Administrators, working with a group of assistant superintendents. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for, Dr. Páez is an associate professor at the Lynch School of Education, Boston College. Her research interests include bilingualism, children's language and literacy development, and early childhood education. Dr. Páez is one of DESE's literacy champions and advised us on the components, structure, and content of the Mass Literacy Guide. For those of you fellow Western Massers out there, a fun fact, Dr. Páez also attended Smith College. Without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Páez.
Thank you, Susan, for that introduction. I wish I had attended Smith. I was in Upper New York in Ithaca. I went to Cornell University, but
Dr. Páez, I'm sorry.
Fan of Smith College. Hi everyone, welcome. I want to thank Susan and Catherine and Donna for the invitation to participate in this webinar series. And I want to tell you, before I start my formal presentation, I have to tell you that it's been an honor for this past years to serve as a literacy champion in Massachusetts. And for those who are participating in the webinar and might not know a lot about this work, I just wanted to say a few words about that experience. As Susan just mentioned, literacy champions were selected from all over Massachusetts, and they represented professionals in different roles, teachers, reading specialists, principals, higher education faculty. And when I was together with that group of literacy champions, we had 3 meetings that started in January of 2020. And we met in January, we met in February. Our meeting in April was canceled due to COVID, but then we continue to provide feedback through online meetings and also in writing, feedback in writing. And so when I was part of that group, I was so empowered by the expertise that we have in the state. And I wanted to let you know that the Mass Literacy Guide, the website, what you see is really the result of all those meetings, the feedback and the professional expertise that we all bring to language and literacy here in the state. Today, I will be discussing how bilingualism contributes to language and early literacy development among young learners, and how can educators and schools build on bilingual students' assets through effective literacy instruction. Give me a minute, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to be sharing some information that I have in this new publication that I co-authored with Lisa Lopez, is Teaching Dual Language Learners. And this was just released in the fall, and you'll see that I have some references to this new book that I was able to write with my friend Lisa. I wanted to start with the demographic profile and focus on Massachusetts. Dual language learners, those students that are learning more than one language, they speak a language other than English at home and are learning a second language at school. Those students have been increasing for the past 2 decades across the nation. We note that since 2000, there's been a 24% increase in DLLs, and there's more than 350 languages represented, including Spanish, of course, is the largest group, but we also have Chinese, Tagalog, Vietnamese, Arabic. And in early childhood settings in particular, we're seeing this increase in dual language learners, and early childhood settings across programs. So Head Start, public, private, they're all experiencing this increase. About 1/3 of all young children in the United States are dual language learners. In Massachusetts, we see this. Over the last 20 years, the number of English learners in Massachusetts has doubled from 40,000 to 100,000. And this past year, in 2019-2020, English learners were 10.8% of the students enrolled in Massachusetts. And again, we see that the majority group was Spanish speakers. I think it's important to note that when I'm referring to Massachusetts, I'm using the term English learners. And it's because the state defines English learners as students who do not speak English or whose native language is not English, and who are not currently able to perform ordinary classroom work in English. And so in the state of Massachusetts, we identify English learners as soon as they start in school, and we assess their skills and we determine if they're English learners. I prefer using the term dual language learners. Is a term that is especially important in early childhood because it acknowledges that students are learning both, not just English, but they're also might be learning and developing in their home. And I want to start today with some reflections from English language learners, from dual language learners. These are young bilingual children. And I'm I'm going to read the quotes here, but if you're reading faster than me, go ahead. But I want to read you these reflections from these young children who are students here in Massachusetts. I love Gujarati and English. I feel my brown skin in my heart. Gujarati is my grandmother's language. This is from Asha, who's a 5-year-old in kindergarten. It feels good to be able to talk Swedish because when friends are over and I want to say something to just my mama and papa, I can tell them that without the friends knowing what I said. This is from Tova, an 8-year-old. And then I feel like learning Vietnamese helps me connect with my culture. And the fun part is to be able to talk to Ong and Ba whenever they visit us. We could sing Vietnamese songs together, and Ba also taught me how to count all the way to 100 in Vietnamese. This is from Amy Gwen, a 9-year-old in 4th grade. What do you notice about these reflections from these young children? I notice how language represents connection for them. Connection with family members, with loved ones. I also see in these reflections that language is part of students' identity and culture. I also see that language is fun. And for these students, for all these students, something that we see in their reflections is that language and bilingualism is an asset. I believe that recognizing that bilingualism is an asset is a critical shift in the mindset that is necessary in early childhood. And I argue that this mindset, this belief of bilingualism as an asset is also necessary for being effective educators of language and early literacy skills. But it's not the only belief. We also have a set of beliefs that are supported by research that should guide how we educate students and how we link knowledge of first and second language development to our practices in the classroom. And so here I'm presenting 5 of these beliefs. Lisa and I write about this in our new book, and I just want to preview with you 5 important beliefs about dual language learners' development that are supported by research. The first is that children are capable of successfully learning multiple languages. Yes, over half of the world population is bilingual. And learning multiple languages during childhood does not cause a language delay or impairment. A second important belief: quality and quantity of language input are important for language learning. There are multiple ways in which children become bilingual and multilingual, but quality and quantity of language is very important. And children need exposure to language in order to develop their language skills. A third belief that knowledge of the first language can support learning a second language. So important. A strong foundation in the first language can help children learn a second language. And this is why bilingual programs have been found to be very effective, because developing multiple languages and supporting children's home languages transfers to the ability to develop new languages. So that potential for transfer and that foundation that helps students learn a second language. And then finally, bilingualism and multilingualism have many linguistic, cognitive, and cultural benefits. And so our task as educators is to continue to think critically about what we believe about language learning, and then examine how those beliefs are linked to our practices. If you believe that first language is important and is the foundation for bilingual students, then you're going to be more likely to support home languages in the classroom. And you start to see these connections between beliefs and practices. Now, these beliefs are important in language and literacy and when we're designing instruction and supporting students in our classroom. And if we think, let's take a closer look at our theories of reading and our model of reading development to understand these connections. You have seen this before, probably. It was presented in the past 2 webinars, and it's something that has really represented well. The Reading Rope by Scarborough, Dr. Hollis Scarborough, has really represented well the simple view of reading in a visual way. And our past 2 presenters did a wonderful explanation of the Reading Rope and highlighting how it shows this relationship between language skills and early literacy skills. But what does this mean for bilingual students that are learning how to read? Well, it means that the model is more complex, and we need to understand the complexity that comes into understanding this relationship between language and early literacy that leads to skill reading and comprehension. Dual language learners are learning these skills in 2 languages. And so the skills of one language can contribute to skills being learned in the other language, and there's a dynamic relationship between the languages. So children need to integrate numerous skills in order to learn how to read, and they need to do it in multiple languages. It is also more complex for bilingual students because of the social cultural context, programmatic and policy factors that impact learning and education. And so for us educators, this means that we need to understand these complexities. We need to understand how these factors interact in our classroom so then we can support young children in not just their phonological and decoding skills, but also very important in their language comprehension skills. This important connection between language and the early literacy skills of decoding and phonological awareness. With monolingual English speakers, you can expect them to come into the classroom and have some language background, right? If they've been using English at home, in their community, in their multiple environments. But with dual language learners, you can assume that they're going to come in prepared with those language skills. And so your first task is going to be to get to know the background of your students and understand these similarities and differences between their languages, their skills, and their educational experiences that have supported uneven development maybe across these different skills. You're going to see this view of reading represented in the Mass Literacy Guide. This is a screenshot from the website, from the Mass Literacy website. And what you can see is that each of these skills is represented in the guide. And when you click in each of these boxes and skills, you'll find that for each of them, there are going to be considerations for bilingual students, as well as suggested strategies for supporting the learning of the students. In today's presentation, I want to highlight a few of the strategies that we know from research with bilingual students and especially with young dual language learners, some strategies that are important to include in your teaching and in your classrooms and schools. First, focus on language development and extended vocabulary. I just told you that for many dual language learners, it might be the first time they're learning a new language in the context of the school. And so you need to make sure that you're building that language while you're teaching in the classroom by establishing a rich language and literacy environment that can support this. And I'll say more about that in a minute. Second, you need to foster phonological awareness. This ability to identify sounds and isolate sounds is critically important for bilingual students as it is for monolingual students. When thinking about bilingual students, you have an added factor, which is the relationship between the languages of the bilingual. And there is research showing transfer of phonological awareness skills, especially when the languages of the students share an alphabetic language, a writing system. You can expect some transfer between the languages. Another important strategy is to integrate instruction of letter identification, decoding, and word recognition skills. Yes, these are skills that need to be taught, and research shows that bilinguals are very good at learning letter identification and decoding. When explicitly taught these skills, they're very good at learning these skills. I think what can be harder to learn are some of these large spaces like vocabulary and language comprehension. Another important strategy is supporting learning about book concepts and print knowledge. And the best way to do that is to immerse young children in reading and read alouds and experience with books. And then finally, engaging students in early writing. There has been a lot of focus on language and decoding skills, but writing is also very important and is connected to oral language. When children are learning the connections between language and print, this is going to later help them identify that print and connect to the sounds of the language and then their conceptual knowledge and vocabulary words. And so giving students early experience, lots of experience with writing is important. Access to a variety of materials, including a variety of paper, markers, crayons, colored pencils, blank books, journal, labels, stamps, you name it. You want to immerse students not just in a reading environment, but an early writing environment. I wanted to stop for a minute and highlight this area of language development and vocabulary because for two reasons. First, we know that there's significant variation in the number of vocabulary words that dual language learners understand and are able to produce in the early years. We have great variation. We have young children, young bilingual children that have a great number of vocabulary words in their repertoire, but then we have other students that might not have as many vocabulary words. And so vocabulary is important because of the variation that we find among dual language learners. And a second reason is because we know that vocabulary is one of the best predictors of comprehension. So it's a foundational skill for reading. It's a great predictor of comprehension, and we can build vocabulary and language development early on in those early childhood years so that when students are approaching the challenge of reading, they're going to be better prepared. And how do we do this? Recently, I did a study with Megina Baker. She's now at Boston University, and Megina and I spent a whole year studying exemplary classrooms, preschool classrooms for bilingual students. And what we found was that in these preschool classrooms, teachers have an intentional focus on language development and vocabulary. We visited classrooms in Head Start, in private, in public preschools, and across all of these exemplary classrooms, we found that teachers were intentional about developing language. And these were some of the strategies that we saw them using. And they focus on high quality interactions. They want to engage children in hearing and using different words, not just hearing, but also using. They create opportunities for back and forth conversations. They develop words in context, whether that is in the context of a book, in the context of an activity, in context of play. They're thinking about presenting those opportunities for new vocabulary words. They scaffold language all the time, and they're reading books. They're listening to stories, they're singing, all of these activities that we know are important for developing language. Another key feature of these exemplary classrooms is the support for home language. If we know that students' home languages can be the foundation and can help learn multiple languages, we need to activate that background knowledge in our classrooms. And we need to think about this possibility of transfer given the relationship between the languages. One way that you can do this, and something that teachers and future teachers in my classes ask me, is how can I support home languages when I don't know the home language of the students in my classroom? And I think this is a really important question. And what I tell my teachers is that you don't need to know the language of all the children in your classroom in order to support their home languages. You can do this. You can consider children as experts who can share with you their knowledge and share with other peers in the classroom their knowledge. And you can leverage resources in the community, including families, inviting families to the classroom, inviting the knowledge and information that families have about their children. And so these are just some of the strategies that not only Megan and I were able to observe in these exemplary classrooms, but also strategies that have been documented by other researchers and scholars in this area. And before concluding today, I wanted to say a few words about assessment of language and early literacy skills. I know this is a topic that has come up in other previous webinars. Participants have been asking about assessment. And so I wanted to have a few minutes to tell you about some of the issues and I think fundamentals for thinking about assessment with dual language learners. We know in early childhood that we want assessment to be systematic, developmentally appropriate, and based on multiple sources of data. Yes. What does this mean for dual language learners? In terms of systematic, we need to make sure that we're assessing the skills that the children are exposed to, the language skills that they're exposed to. So you need to inquire and you need to have an understanding of what are the languages that the child is exposed to and uses. So then you can assess in this language and children can demonstrate what they know and are able to do. In terms of developmentally appropriate, you want to assess learning that is connected to the curriculum and the teaching in the classroom so that the LL children can have an opportunity to learn these skills. If instruction is in two languages, so if the child is participating in a bilingual program, whether that is transitional or dual language education, then the assessment needs to be conducted in both languages. And a final point has to do with multiple sources of data. You want to include observations and screener measures early on during the early childhood years, for sure. And for dual language learners, you want to engage the families in assessing their language and early literacy skills in the home languages. This is especially important when trying to determine if this child has a special need. And so this is a critical aspect of assessment, and I'm happy to talk more about assessment in the Q&A. I started the presentation with reflections for students, so I want to end in the same way, except these reflections now are from older students. These are my children who have developed as bilinguals and can appreciate their Spanish and English skills as a gift now that they're older. And so this is a quote from Isabella. Bilingualism has been a virtue in my life. It has created a dichotomy that helps me think in different ways and understand various perspectives. It has given me the power to connect with a widespread group of people and join multiple communities. To be bilingual is to be given the gift of diversity and connection through people, languages, and experiences. And this from Miguel. He's older, just a year older. Miguel is 20. Being bilingual has been priceless for me. It has opened doors for me in my academic and professional pursuits. It has allowed me to communicate with and form close relationships with my grandparents. It has allowed me to go back to where my parents were raised and immerse myself in a completely different culture. But the beauty of bilingualism isn't in the obvious benefits, but rather the small incidents that make your day. Whether it's forming a quick bond with a stranger over a 5-minute of small talk, or getting some extra wonderful customer service at my favorite Mexican restaurant, being bilingual lights up my days. It makes the world a smaller place, and in an ever-growing and advancing society, smallness and familiarity is always greeted with warmth. Thank you.
Oh, Dr. Páez, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing a piece of your students and also your family with us. I'm going to turn it over to Donna Goldstein, who's going to make some connections to the Mass Literacy Guide and show you a great resource that Dr. Páez has authored and allowed us to use in the guide. So Donna, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, Dr. Páez. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, I need to get back. Okay, here we are. So more about Dr. Páez's work, as well as additional early literacy information for English learners, can be found in several places in 2 key areas of the guide: the components of the core literacy block, which is right here, and skills for early reading, which Dr. Páez specifically referenced. She showed you a slide there. Right now, however, I'm going to direct you to the oral language section, and the oral language section lives within components of the core literacy block. So I'm at the core literacy block, and I'm just going to scroll down to oral language. Within the oral language page, we have situated a pop-up box with considerations for students learning English. In here, embedded in this section, we're going to take a look at the final bullet around supports for English learners for a resource called 5 Practical Strategies for Supporting Dual Language Learners' Language and Literacy Skills. And this is a resource that was developed by Dr. Páez and her colleague, and she has graciously shared with us. Okay. This resource outlines key strategies, how these strategies can be developed in the classroom, as well as aligned examples. Items, critical items, just like this, really valuable resources to strengthen evidence-based support for English learners can be found in these easily accessible pop-up sections throughout these 2 highlighted sections within components of the core literacy block and skills for early reading. So that was a quick peek, a quick taste at the beginning, just a very early start of many other things that are within the guide. Dr. Páez, thank you again so much. And I think it is now time for our Q&A. So Susan, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Thank you, Donna. Catherine Tarka, who's the director of the Office of Literacy, if she wouldn't mind taking herself off of mute, and she will be presenting some questions to Dr. Páez.
Thank you. And Dr. Páez, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and resources with us today. I have a couple of questions that I've culled from the Q&A box to ask you. And we'll start with a question about sheltered English immersion versus a bilingual immersion approach. Can you talk a little bit about sheltered English versus bilingual immersion, and whether there are pros and cons that educators should think about in designing settings for their youngest students?
Excellent question. Before I go ahead and answer the question, I wanted to let you know that it's not just my work in the Mass Literacy Guide. There is a lot of resources about English language learners. And if you look through it carefully, you'll find very useful tools there and strategies and connections to other websites that can help you teach dual language learners. SEI, Structured English Immersion, is a model for teaching English learners that is different than bilingual programs. It's focused on developing English language so that students can be then mainstream in English. And so the goal is to develop English language by scaffolding and using some of the strategies that we know are supportive of bilingual students. And when we're talking about bilingual models like transitional bilingual model, dual language education model, those programs, the goals are broader, right? So you're not just giving students scaffolded English in order to transition them into the mainstream. You're focused in the transitional model. You can take as many as 3 years to support the home language, the first language, at the same time that you're building English language development. And in the dual language education, which is one of the premier models, and we have a lot of research showing the effectiveness of that, your goal is biliteracy, biculturalism, and you're really focusing on both two languages. It could be the home languages for some students, but you're building literacy and cultural competence in two languages. So each of those models are different, and the research we have now stemming from California, Arizona, and Massachusetts, which used the SCI model when bilingual education was eliminated, are showing that bilingual models are more effective than SCI models in supporting bilingual students. We know that from the research, and we have now more evidence. And that's why I'm so excited about the Look Act that we passed in Massachusetts in 2017, and we started implementation of it in 2018 and 2019, because the Look Act here in Massachusetts, it's gonna expand the flexibility of programs that we can offer our bilingual students.
Thank you so much. Another question that we often hear when working with educators is about the development of foundational skills for young speakers of multiple languages. So you talked about phonological awareness, other early foundational skills like phonics. Teachers sometimes ask if those skills develop differently or on a different timeline if children are learning in two languages. So you already talked about the fact that phonological awareness and phonics skills should be developed with dual language learners the same or just as they are for monolingual students. But does it need to be taught differently or approached differently for dual language learners?
I think when you're teaching dual language learners, you need to understand the differences that come about looking at the similarities and different writing systems of the languages that the children, the students are learning. And so if you're teaching phonological awareness, it would be helpful for you to know if the students are learning English and are coming from another alphabetic language, or maybe from a syllabic or from a logographic language. And then you can start identifying what are some of the challenges and factors that might impact students as they learn these foundational skills. And so thinking about the similarities and differences between the languages that the children use and are exposed to, thinking about particular sounds in English that you can expect children maybe to have more difficulty in recognizing or hearing. And then making sure that you're teaching in a way that values their home language. So if you know that students are using some of their home language in their interpretations or in their pronunciation, I think it's important to validate that, acknowledge to the children that they're using perhaps their home language sound system, but the English is different. And for those students that are in the dual language programs and bilingual programs, this is something that happens naturally because of the program. They get to learn in both languages, and they very early on start comparing and developing that metalinguistic awareness about how languages are similar and different to each other.
Thank you. And
I
there's
could
so
say
many.
a lot more about that.
I know.
But I want to get more questions.
I know there's so many questions coming in, and I'm afraid we're only going to have time for one more. But I do want to mention that contact information will be shared at the end of this webinar. So if people in attendance wanted to follow up for another opportunity to ask their question and get answers either from the department or from Dr. Páez, we're happy to do that. But I'm going to ask you one more question.
Literacy guide.
Yes,
There's
exactly.
a lot of information there too.
So the last question I want to raise for today is about assessment. For dual language learners, you talked a little bit about the importance of systematic assessment across domains. But can you talk about the language of assessment? Is it of concern to use an English-only assessment? And how should educators think about assessing young children who are developing in 2 languages or more?
Excellent question. The issue of assessment is one that has been debated and researched for dual language learners. The new National Academy review of the literature has a whole chapter on assessment, in part because there are so many issues that you need to consider. I'm gonna reinforce something that Dr. Gabb said in the first webinar of this series. Dr. Gabb said that we need to avoid, when working with bilingual students, we need to avoid a wait to fail model. This is exactly how she phrased it, that we need to engage early in screening and making sure that we're integrating our young students in a multi-tier system of support so that we can identify the students that are at risk and the students that need intervention. And so this multi-tier system of support, let me show you something here quickly that you'll find in the Mass Literacy Guide. I'm so happy that this is part of the guide, this multi-tier system of support, because this is something that is going to help educators identify those bilingual students that are in need of intervention and special needs versus those bilingual students that are just starting to develop English as a language. And that's why they might demonstrate a gap in some of these skills, right? So that's the big question for teachers. Is this a language issue or is this a special needs? Do I need to refer this child for further assessment? And so if you go here to the database making decisions, you're going to see recommendations for assessment, for screeners. And if a child is bilingual and the child has been identified as an English learner according to the state definition and guidelines, you want to assess that child in both languages. And why is that? Because when children are identified with a language disability, a delay, this delay is going to be demonstrated in both languages. And so if you only assess English, you're not going to be able to determine if this is a learning issue or if this is a special needs issue, right? Is it lack of exposure to English or is something else going on with this student that you need further assessment? And so I really like the resources in mass literacy for this and for the multi-tier system of support. And if you want more information about this, I'm happy to share it in the chat, or you can see it in the mass literacy guide.
Thank you, Dr. Páez, so much. I want to just thank you so much. We really, really appreciate, I know we could stay on for hours. Here is the slide with the contact information for the department. Also, those of you who received the link from me in an email also have my contact information. I want to thank all of you for taking time out of your schedules to join us today. And please join us on February 3rd for our final webinar in this series. Once again, thank you, Dr. Páez, and thank you to everyone.
Thank you, everyone.